Signore e signori, buonasera. Buonasera. Benvenuti alla Casa Italiana Zerilli-Marimò della New York University. My name is Stefano Albertini. I'm the director of the Casa. It's a great pleasure to welcome our members and the people also who are here for the first time. As you might know, this event, this screening and discussion that will follow it, are part of the celebrations for the Giorno della Memoria, Holocaust Remembrance Day, that we observe in New York with a series of events, and as it is tradition, all the major Italian cultural institutions in New York get together to prepare a calendar of events that is coordinated by the Consulate General of Italy and by the Centro Primo Levi. This year in particular, the film we are seeing tonight is one of 3 films, the 2 other ones shown in other venues, that are the core of the celebrations for this year. Before asking the director of the Centro Primo Levi to tell you very briefly what is the fil rouge that keep these 3 films together, I would like to invite you to stay for the discussion at the end of the film with the director, Peter Stastny, and with Paola Mieli. So please stay after the screening for the discussion that will follow. I will briefly introduce our guests after the screening and before the Q&A begins. And now please welcome Natalia Endrimi.
Thank you very much, Stefano. I'll say 2 brief words on the series of films that we have selected this year for Remembrance Day. As those who follow Centro Primo Levi may know, it is very rare that we use film as a base of discussion of conversation for this observance for Remembrance Day. But this year, in view of the fact that for the 8th anniversary of the Italian racial laws, many documentaries came out, we thought that was an appropriate thing to do. And we selected 3 films that for us are emblematic of 3 ways in which the history of the Shoah becomes film material. The first that we showed at the Italian Cultural Institute on the 24th was dedicated to the history of the Pencho, a ship of refugees that ventured on the Danube and shipwrecked in the island of Rhodes. And is a documentary that is exclusively based on testimonies, on memory. The second that we had at the Calandra Institute, Diversi 1938, is a documentary that is mostly based on the use of scholarship and historical research as film material. And tonight, Peter Stastny film, I would say, is a way to use film itself to overcome, to go beyond these 2 these 2 forms of reference, of use of history and memory as film material. We'll see later more about this, and I'd like to thank all of you for being here on such a cold night. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Stefano, for his introduction, but especially thank you very much, Peter, for his extraordinary movie that I find remarkable, and each single time I see, this is the 3rd time I've been seeing it, I learn to appreciate even deeper. And I have to say that it's a little bit of a killer, because each time I start, it moves me so deeply that it's very hard for me then to shift to a mood where I can talk about it. It seems to me that in itself, this movie carries with it so many facets and so profound that it's very difficult to follow them all. So I want to thank you very much for asking me to come to discuss it with you, as well as I want to thank Natalia Endrimi for inviting me tonight. I would like just to highlight a few points, and maybe we can have a discussion about them. First of all, in watching again this movie, I realized the extraordinary role that the music plays in it. The role of music is very special here because it's obviously not just a soundtrack at all, but is in itself, I would say, a second voice that sustains yours in your quest through this trajectory, what I experience as a sort of trajectory in your research. You say that when your mother stopped talking, it was necessary for you to find a way to go further in researching what had happened, and that in a sense it was necessary to leave behind the, I don't know how you phrase it, but I think something of the order of the ghetto of the ghetto of the mind that you experienced in Vienna, and therefore that you had to cross the ocean and come to New York, and that what you found in New York that was capable of, in a sense, relaunching both your research and your life was music. And specifically the music of these three musicians that are Anthony Coleman, the piano player. And if I remember correctly, once you told me that you experienced him as your prop, or something of that word.
Prop, I would say, someone that sometimes can stand in for me, but do things that I cannot do.
And then also Marc Ribot, the guitar player, who each time he plays the voice of pain, of despair of some sort, of what specifically word cannot say. And then the voice of Frank London, the trumpet, that is more a religious melody of some sort, right? And you were saying that maybe, when you found this musician, it was possible for you to think that maybe together would have been possible to transform a lament into a new song. A new song for today. So, do you want to say something about that?
Well, I do want to first thank Natalia and everyone here and the Casa Italiana for inviting us and for having this opportunity. I really appreciate it very much. I mean, I don't want to say too much because we're going to have a discussion here, so I'll go back to your point. And thank you all for coming out in the cold. I really appreciate that very much. With the music, I was reaching for something. I was reaching for something that would take me and maybe other people as well into a place where you can imagine that you can move forward. If you have forward and still in a somehow a Jewish way, and even though that may seem odd because this music doesn't necessarily end up being all Jewish, although a lot of it does. I do feel if you don't have religion and if you don't spend your entire life memorializing and remembering and researching what happened 75 years ago, and you're unhappy with what's going on in the Middle East and you feel it's a situation that has to do with what happened 75 years ago still, you have to find something else. You have to, and to me the music was really the only chance in some ways. It was a big chance. So that's why the music and the musicians are in the film the way they are, and not only to help tell the story, but really also to create a possibility for movement forward. At the same time, also remind us of the sadness that is still there.
But each of them has a different role, right?
Well, yes, they each had a different role because I sort of made that happen. You know, I kind of assigned them, but they also naturally gravitated. Anthony, as a key, uses the piano in many different ways. In this case, he uses the piano by playing music by Mordechai Gebirtig, who was killed in the Krakow ghetto and who was an amazing poet and songwriter. But he plays it in a mixture of nostalgia and deconstruction at the same time. So that's why I asked Anthony to play this particular music. I mean, Anthony also made the music for my first film about this topic, Conversation in the Mountains. And Frank, as you said, the spiritual, the sort of the trumpet as a way to supersede, as a way to vanquish, also in some kind of, you know, in Jericho, the trumpet or the sound of the shofar or the trumpet made the walls crumble. So it's an instrument that actually has a very strong force, you know, and a strong leadership that I would say. And Mark, of course, the blues, the wailing, the pain, the screaming, the anger. So those are some of the elements that he carries, not just here, but you know, he carries that sometimes in other places too.
It's very interesting also because it brings about the very particular role that music plays in general. I couldn't help but thinking of some remarks made by an extraordinary colleague of ours who unfortunately just passed away. His name is Alain Didier-Veil, who wrote specifically on the function of music in terms of our drives, and who brings about this idea that music, in fact, is not something we listen to, but is music that listens to us. Insofar as music supposes that there is going to be a listener, a human being, who, as human being, as subject, is going to be able to be touched in his heart, her heart, by music, and therefore bring about the core of humanity that is in us, right? Which makes me think about specifically what Stella Levi, who is here with us tonight, even though I didn't see her.
Thank you.
Stella says something extraordinary, right? Because she says that music touches our heart, and that it's a way towards a tikkun olam, the music, right, itself. So I think that this is a very important point, and also because it brings about the question of what is redemption? What can we think of when we think about redemption, right? Because redemption is something of the order of, in a sense, retaking possessions of our past in some way, retaking possession of past, for instance, through rituals, as Stella showed, you know, very clearly, and actually she spells it out very clearly in the movie, how this reconquering this rituality and symbolic rituality is a way to affirming the very identity that cannot be broken and cannot be stolen from us, right? And so, you know, this redemption in the sense of reconquering this past, you know, but also in terms of making something out of it, right? Stella, I wrote it down here because she says something very interesting, because when you say music open our art, then you say, so do you think that music is a form of redemption? And she replies, no, it's not a form of redemption, is a tikkun olam, which means a form of, a way of repairing. A way of repairing the world. Repairing the world that in itself implies something of the order of an action. And then you have a discussion about it, which interested me a great deal, where you ask her, so it's in fact praying enough, is dancing enough? And she says, no, that's not enough. Because the repairing implies acting. Acting, an acting that is also an acting of everyday life eventually. Right? So I wanted to hear.
Well, so many things. I do want to say one more thing about the music. You know, when you think back about religion and how closely tied music is to religion, in my experience, but pretty much in everybody's experience, and then you take the religion out of the music, if you can imagine doing that, then you're still left with something that contains religion in a paradoxical way. So, and redemption, you know, what is redemption to me? It's reaching for something that you cannot reach. You know, it's trying to make a circle when no circle can be made. You know, like I try to make circles, you know, you lose your garden, then you get another one. But it's not a real circle. You know, you cannot actually recreate. You cannot actually find that garden again. You cannot actually find what you had in Rhodes when you had it. You cannot actually, but you can sort of make an effort. You know, you can reach for it. But in reaching, you find the blues also.
Right.
In reaching, you always find the impossibility of success, you know, in moving beyond a lot, especially in art in my generation. And I can't speak about your generation really. The impossibility of actually finally moving beyond.
Right.
So that's some of the thoughts I had. That's why this idea of redemption, blues, came to me.
Right. The blues. Yeah. Yeah, because there is also a melancholic quality, a sad quality in this blues.
Well, this is one of the things I didn't actually expect to find as I was making the film, that there was more need for melancholy and mourning than I anticipated. You know, it's almost like you feel like the mourning has already taken place, you know. Now we're just in the business of remembering and memorializing and moving forward, but you can't really without remembering that mourning is not over. You know, and in fact, when the generation of my parents and when that generation goes, it's another opportunity to mourn for a bigger loss.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a return of a mourning that is endless in a sense. So there are in the movies extraordinary characters, you know, people that you encountered through these meetings that you organized, right? Can you tell us a little bit about these meetings?
Well, initially the idea was to find many people from the survivor generation who would be interested in collaborating with me in some way. I had this idea that people would want to actually work together on a project, such as a film, that would illustrate not just what happened 70 years ago, but what's going on now and where it's going maybe in the future. But when we did that, and we had several groups like that, it turned out that the people were really into their own story and into their own stuff. You know, they weren't interested in suddenly becoming like a group of collaborators. And several of them stood out, you know, and several of them connected. We connected for different reasons, each of them. I could tell you the reasons, it would probably take too long, but we gravitated towards each other, and that's how the movie came to be, because it became more of a collaboration between some individuals.
Right. Yeah, and it became obvious, but this collaboration allowed for a certain expression, for a certain speech to come out that was addressed thanks to your interlocution. It was possible to see it developing. It was great.
Well, it was also interesting the way it was edited, because clearly people, when they come and talk to you and the topic is the Shoah, they will immediately attempt to tell you their story.
Mm-hmm.
Except Stella will not immediately do that. She will do the opposite. She will do the opposite. But but I didn't really want to make a movie about the stories about their lives and how they went through the war. I didn't.
Right.
That's not the movie. So I had to sometimes make an effort to say, okay, let's put that. No, we'll talk about that. We'll put that on camera too. But in the end, the way I edited it, I was looking for those things that helped me imagine a future or also a present, as opposed to just the past, and that's kind of what I was looking for in the conversations. Sometimes in spite of because the first man, for example, Joe,
Julian.
that was really the only thing he wanted to do, is tell that story, and there wasn't anything more. And of course, he's a religious man, so that was also part of it. But
except that his story has a very important function in this documentary, because first of all, he says something he witnessed that is very rare to have a testimony of it, number one. And then it's, in a sense, it seems to me that in the movie is marking a kind of a time of the truth that is spelled out, that is declared, an unavoidable truth that also marks the fact, and then and then the quest and the search starting from there.
yeah, I mean, I needed a touchstone. I needed something that's like an essence of what happened. Like an essential moment, an essential witnessing. Because without that, it would have felt to me almost sacrilegious in some ways.
Yeah.
To just talk about the present and just talk about the future. And then, so I needed, he for me was a very important piece. Of course, also for people who don't know too much about the history.
Exactly.
To have some kind of a moment that really hits it on the nail, for me anyway. I don't know what it does for other people that much, but to me it was one of those kinds of stories.
It does. Yeah, absolutely. Then, well, of course, then there are other characters that are extraordinary, like Walter. Walter is extraordinary. He manages to say, no, first of all, there is something that is splendid about him, that is a determination of living, this passion for life. I understand that it's a libidinal passion for life, which, he manages to really transmit, and it's extraordinary. But at the same time, every time I listen to him, I realize how deep are the things that he says. Because, for instance, here tonight I was struck by this idea of his that what would he do? When you ask him, what would he do if he could do something, change something? And first thing that he says is eliminate religion, number one, which is pretty strong statement. And the second one is to have a second planet, to search for a second planet, because our planet is going to disappear. Because our sun is not going to keep shining, and which is kind of extraordinary. Also, I found rewatching it extraordinary is returning to Vienna, because you accompany his return to saying Vienna is a place that allowed us not to feel exiled, so that it is possible to return to Vienna. So I would like to understand better.
So there are two things. I do want to say something about Walter, if I may, without psychoanalyzing him.
No.
Unfortunately, he's not with us. He passed on, so I was sad about that. But See, to me, when you talk about redemption and blues, Walter it brings the extremes of both together all the time. What do I mean by that? The
Yes.
extremes of both. What's the redemption for him? Another planet. You know, you could say that's insane or that's extreme, but it's still a form of redemption. And then he can sink very, very deeply into despair. And I didn't want to show that too much, but you can obviously see that
Yeah, you can
in
see.
him all the time, you know. So this extreme back and forth was really what impressed me, what touched me most. I mean, obviously he had to live with that, and he found a way.
And his way of walking that represents that so well, you know. Because it has
Well-
some incredible way.
Well, he did have a hip fracture that
Well,
he
still.
was when he tried to cross Queens Boulevard, he was hit by a car. So
Oh my God.
nobody should ever try to cross Queens Boulevard, especially not after a certain age. And you were asking
About Vienna.
About Vienna. Now, you know, I guess you know that I'm from Vienna. I mean, I do say it in the beginning. I don't. My mother lives in Vienna, and I say, why do I say Vienna has not erased us? And I guess I compare Vienna to the place where my mother was from, where clearly everybody has been erased. You know, that's to me an extreme example of erasure, if you will. That place, there can never be anything rebuilt there. It will never happen. It's just a fact. But Vienna has the chance. It's a rich, big place, so there's a chance. Now, of course, I said I left because I didn't, at the time, it was kind of a ghetto in the sense that we all, whatever 7,000 Jews that lived there, had to deal with the fact that we were children of survivors, and this was our job to be that in that place, you know? So I didn't want to do that, but after all these years, it does feel like home again, also.
It does feel like
It does feel it, absolutely. And to go to the vineyards and to sit in the Heurigen and to be like everybody else feels great, you know. And Walter, you can see how he feels
Yeah,
in that place. You know, it feels like he never left, even though he probably as a child never went to a place like that.
There is, before getting to the other characters, there is something that comes to my mind that I cannot help but bringing up now because I don't want to forget it. That is, Walter makes me think about his need to hold to a tree.
Mm-hmm.
So the role that trees play in your movie,
Oh.
in your documentary, because they obviously have, a very important role.
Interesting. My brother said when he showed my mother the garden that he put together, he says, "I just cut down this tree." Remember that?
Yeah.
So I didn't really think about all the trees, you know, and the trees in Birkenau. You know, people may not know what that is. You know, people may not actually know that this is Birkenau and this is the place where people walk through to the gas chambers. This exact place, and this exact little pond is where the ashes of the people are still today. People may not know that, and that's not the kind of film I wanted to make, where someone asked me, where is that, and what is that, and why didn't you put a title under it? But I didn't want to, you know. I mean, I wanted to intimate. Yeah. I wanted to intimate the place, and if people don't know that Birkenau is called Birkenau because of the birch trees, that's all right. They don't have to know that, or they can read about it maybe, but that's where the people walk through that birch forest. So other trees, you know, Walter's tree, I mean, you're making a nice connection there.
That trees know a lot of things, and they've been around for many, many years, and they are incredibly beautiful and telling a lot with their silence. So, okay, so then there is also this lady, Marion Blumenthal-Lazen, who had devoted her life to retelling the story and to bring it to the new generations. What do you think about it?
I mean, if I had just known about her as from a distance, it would have struck me, you know, what I call the professional memorializers. You know, this is a business. This is what they do. It's like canned. You know, it's like. But when you meet Marion, you know that she brings it every time as if she says it for the first time. You know, and that is an amazing quality that she has. Even if I don't know how she does it, you know, because she does pretty much almost the same thing every time, and she's done it at least probably 5,000-6,000 times, maybe more, and she continues. She's on the road now as we speak. So for me, she's an example of someone that does this job. She's taken on this job, and I feel with her. I wouldn't be one of those people. I would never, you know. But I feel. Originally, I said, well, this is like an automaton. This is like a machine. You know, is there a relationship between the machine and the hologram? What is that all that's left? You know, is that all that people are quote unquote good for or doing for us? But then when I really met her, and when I really, there was way more than that. You know, and of course, for me, then at the end, there was the religious connection, which it doesn't come out so much. But when she shows her family, you can kind of see this is a religious family. And this is what keeps her going as much as anything else.
Yeah, because you address also the place that religion has as one of the way of what to do with what is left of our memory. So, and also in reference to your grandfather, right?
Yeah, I mean, I was stunned when I found this letter that he wrote. I was stunned, you know. He wrote this letter literally 7 years after he was, or 8 years after he was liberated from Auschwitz. There's not one word about the war. There's not one word about what happened. Everything is all about, this is what you got to do to exist well and to be well and to have hope, and it's finished. This is it. And it was very clear. And my cousins, who you saw, some of you saw, they live like that. This is how they live. And I'm very jealous. You know, I find it very hard to understand. You know, I don't find it hard to understand. If you're in it, you live it. But if you're not in it, then you have a bigger problem. You have a much bigger problem. Then you have to make movies.
Definitely the movies Tikkun Olam,
Well,
for sure.
Small.
It's small. Well, I don't know if it's as small, but it is something. Well, of course, then there is Stella. I cannot not return to Stella Levi because, you know, you bring up something very important, that I would say also very important for all of us, but for a psychoanalyst in particular, I would say. That is to say, the necessity to count with the other. Throughout several interventions of yours in this group, you speak about, and what about the other? In other words, that is impossible to exist as such without reckoning with the other. You even speak about, recognizing oneself in the other. Right, which is definitely your call. Stands out. Among all, the people that are present in this documentary, right? Because it's also, I would say that it's a very interesting position that you represent. Because if Walter here is the voice of a determination of living, and in a sense of living eventually all the possible lives, even for 10,000 years prior and after. Your voice is instead the voice of the ethics of living, which is something very different. And it brings about precisely the question of how is it possible to be human without living with the other and recognizing the other as different.
But-
therefore recognizes difference as such. Right?
But as I'm watching it today, and as I'm listening to what you're saying, and re-watching what Stella said in the movie, I'm realizing it goes even further than that. How can you be a Jew without thinking about the other?
Exactly.
How can you deal with the Holocaust properly without dealing with the other, which would mean that if you only deal with what happened to the Jews, and if you only deal with it as a Jew that thinks about Jews, then you have a really big problem, because you're stuck. You're stuck in this position. And Stella, to me, I don't want to talk about Stella, she's sitting right here. Stella, to me, you take us out of both of these quandaries in some way. Those are two different quandaries. You take us out of the quandary of just being a Jew that deals with the Shoah for the rest of the Jewish eternity, and you take us out of the quandary of being a Jew that has forgotten everything that happened before the Shoah.
Right.
You take us out of those two quandaries, and those are major, major problems continuing today.
Yeah.
And that's why it's not like I want to idealize you, but it's very clear that these are positions that not many people take, especially if they've been where you were for a moment.
But it's very important because it's really indicating, is an ethical position that gives a very specific trajectory, and therefore hope for us.
That may be the path to redemption.
Well, I like Stella's idea of repairing in the making, which is an endless remaking, right? And I think that not remaking the same, but making, right? I like it very much. But of course, it's thanks to, I guess, her therapeutic intervention. You introduced in your documentary Salah. Salah Tamari, right? So I would like you to speak a little bit about your encounter with him.
Well, I can speak about my encounter with him outside of the movie, which is that I met him 25 years ago, and then he was literally a very strapping Palestinian, still a fedayeen in a sense, like he was one of the leaders of the PLO in the early days. He was caught up in the Lebanon war in Ansar, which was a prison where 10,000 Palestinians were interned by the Israelis, and he organized the whole. And there was multiple factions of Palestinians in that prison, and he organized all the inmates to negotiate with the Israelis, and he impressed me a great deal. He impressed me. But 25 years later, when I found him, and I'll tell you in a second why I went to see him, not just to catch up, so to speak, but because it was very important for me to distinguish the so-called the enemies of today from the enemies from then. It was really, really important to not confound them and not because that's constantly done, it's constantly being done.
Yes.
And he was going to help me with that project. That was my hope. And he did to some extent, but by the time I met him again, he was not well. And but I felt that also kind of added some of the blues to the story, because clearly the situation is dreadful, and clearly he senses and embodies it to me. So the sort of militancy that he represented originally, which you can dialogue with when 25 years ago, the militancy that you can talk to, that you can look in the eye. At this point, when I encountered him again, the militancy was kind of dissipated, and what was left was some level of hope that you could see. He's reaching for it, But at the same time, you also feel the dejection and
the dejection, yes. At the same time, he says something stunning. That is, he says peace is inevitable, and it seems to be very convinced about it.
Well, as much as if there is war, there has to be peace, right? I don't think there's such a thing as permanent war in the history of human. No, I don't think it happened. Well, I don't. Maybe it feels like that sometimes, but I think there are moments of peace that do happen, and I don't think he's just saying. I mean, I think the situation. I mean, I don't want to get too far down the road of talking about the situation there, because it's not the main story. But clearly, I mean, what do you think? What did it mean to you when he said that?
I don't know. I mean, it opened up something for me. I started thinking of it. I don't know. I don't have an answer for it, but it stayed in my mind. I would like to study this statement. I mean, one way to approach it is what you just said. You know, that is inevitable. If you have war, you will have peace. But I didn't hear it this way.
Right.
I heard it as if he had also, in the recognition of his dejection and his pain, he had something to say. I would have wanted to know more.
Well, he reaches for something. I find that he reaches for something. 2 minutes? Is that what she said? 2 minutes.
Okay.
And then we ask a couple. He reaches for something. I feel that he tries to say we're related. He tries to say we can all live in this beautiful land.
Yes, he does.
I see the boy and the two young men under the keffiyeh, so he reaches for something. He hopes for something. Does he really believe that? I don't know, but I think he strongly is reaching, and in his reaching helped me to some extent, you know.
All right, since we don't have more, there's just one question I want to ask you. That is, this documentary is, how can I put it, a step in a trajectory. You had made another movie before, which is an opening towards what then you develop here. And I told you the other day that I had the feeling that today you are vis-a-vis this documentary in a different place than a few months ago. As if you had changed your relation to the documentary at this point. So I wanted to ask you, where are you in relation to it now?
I mean,
and if you foresee the next step?
I mean, the grandiose idea that film could be a piece of tikkun olam, that's a really crazy notion, I think, to some extent. But so when you make a film like this, where you have this somewhere in the back of your grandiose little self in your mind, and then you say, boom, here it is, and then you watch it and you see what people say, and you obviously know that it's a tiny little speck of a contribution to a really big problem. And you know, maybe the bigger contribution could be that people will understand that the problem has not been addressed really fully in many different ways, and that when we're at this stage of history, people are repeating the same way to deal with history, we have a problem. So maybe the idea is this could be a beginning, not necessarily for me, but for other people to also deal with this history in a new way, in a way that is not merely, I mean, you see movies being made today that show piles of bodies over and over and over again to drive it home like a repetition compulsion. That's not what I don't want that. I honestly don't want to see that anymore. So I don't know if this is a contribution to that. What the future will bring remains to be seen. I very much enjoy talking with people, and I don't know if we have a little time. Do we have time for any?
If you want to take a couple of questions, that would be great.
You want to take a couple of questions? It's okay. 2 or 3. Tommy?
We sort of grew up together in Vienna, and my experience also was that I was very angry growing up as a son of an Auschwitz survivor, and especially at Austrians, because obviously Mr. Schickel-Gruber and when you go down the pyramid, a high percentage were Austrians, but history never judged the Austrians. a lot of them, they looked at Austrians, they were the first victim of Germany. And even you asked the lady, did you forgive the Germans? What about the Austrians? And you say, okay, Austria is nice now, it's welcoming, it's rebuilding, it's redemption. And for me, I worked with Simon Wiesenthal for a while, and his life was redemption for him was put those criminals to justice. And for you, and I also remember growing up and walking down the street with you on Yom Kippur, where you wouldn't wear your hat because you were ashamed what people would think about us, wearing sneakers and black hats on Yom Kippur, because we were only 10,000 Jews there, and I was asked in school, there was like 5 Jews in my school, I was asked, how come you don't have horns? And that made me always angry. And with you, I don't ever feel that you had an anger.
Well, I guess the question has to do with what happened to my anger. Maybe that's the question, something like that you're asking. I would say in this film I saved it up I don't think it's gone.
The next movie?
I don't think it's gone. Well, there's a hypothetical. One could hypothesize a movie about anger. One could imagine going to Germany. I don't know why. And now the movie I made before, Conversation in the Mountains, is very different, and it's based on a text by Paul Celan. And it deals with the Austrians. It deals not only with the Austrians, it deals with the German language, and it deals with this home that we cannot really inhabit, which is the language, the countryside, the place. But you see, I do say Vienna is different in some weird way. You know, emotionally to me it is. But the anger, it's not hard to find, but the addresses are harder to find, you know? Even if you want to go politically in the right wing, Renaissance, you could find enemies, you know, you could find anger, but I don't think that's the anger that I would want to connect with. I think that's too simplistic a form of anger.
But it's interesting also, our parents, the question is, how could you live in Austria after surviving the war? And my father would never go back to Hungary because he was deported from Hungary, but Austria was okay, which was completely...
Any, one or two more? One more? Some more?
Peter, that was so unbelievably beautiful for one. I wanted to ask you maybe to comment on the scene, which now I realize is in Birkenau with the 2 moons, as somehow something that you said before in this conversation about mourning and kind of like an ambiguous loss that returns and you keep mourning and you sort of slip in and out of that. And I thought of just like Jewishly with how we proceed with mourning, with the 7 days and the 30 days and this moon and all this. So if you could just say something about the moons.
Well, first of all, it is the moon that was in Auschwitz when we spent the night there filming. So that is an authentic moon in that place. Now, whether that means anything to anyone, obviously not, because people don't necessarily. But then when I was editing, it seemed like, what's the word? Caesura. What is the word? Caesura. A place of transformation. Here is one thing that ended, and here follows another thing that starts. It's the night, whether it's the night in Auschwitz or and the moon takes us out of the horror, and then the morning comes, if you will, and you move on, not without sadness. So why are there 2 moons? I can't give you the answer, except that it appealed to me to have the second moon. We took a shot from 2 angles. In fact, the moon had moved. So time passes, lots of time also, you know, always. So I figured that would be it didn't have like, I'm saying I'm putting 2 moons in so that I could show time passing. But
Walter played a role in it, of course. These 2 planets.
yeah. So are we done? Sorry, I don't know. I didn't mean to sound like that. Thank you. Thank you so much. Thank you.